9 times out of 10, growing a business means hiring employees. These dedicated, hardworking people will be the backbone of the company, helping you take advantage of bigger opportunities, serving your customers, and if you do it right, they'll run the place well enough for you to be able to step away when you want to for some much-deserved R&R. But with employees comes responsibility. There is a contract that exists between you and them, whether you've ever written it down or not. There are laws that govern the way that business owners can treat their employees, and getting on the wrong side of the law can be an expensive or even business-ending decision. Our guest today is a New York workplace discrimination attorney and civil rights litigator. He's the guy your employees might call when they feel that you've knowingly or unknowingly crossed a line that has hurt them. But today, he works for you because he has agreed to share some things on the show that every business owner should know. Proud Nation, please welcome to the show, Alex Umansky. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how are you?
I'm
happy
good.
to be here.
Thank you. And I want to just start by asking you, I'm sure that you've seen situations where business owners didn't realize that they had crossed a line and maybe given an opportunity and taken steps to get it right. But I'm also guessing that you've seen situations where employers have knowingly taken advantage of employees and need to be, taken to, or brought to a situation where they can make that right. So what have been your experiences in dealing with and representing employees who have been wronged by their employers?
It's a great question. So it comes from many areas. Most of the time, and unless there's just to be clear, unless there's a contractual agreement between employee and employer, in my state, New York and New Jersey, and in most states across the nation, an employee at will is an employee at will. An employer could terminate them for any reason or no reason, even a false reason. Mm-hmm. So there's really no such thing as wrongful termination unless it crosses into illegality, where it's rather discrimination, retaliation, or unpaid wages and wage and hour issues. But I think the most important thing for employers to look out for is evoke trust in your employees. Have a procedure in place. Have a complaint procedure in place. Clearly state the policies of the business. So if an employee has an issue, even if it's not an illegal issue, they know who to turn to and they know who to speak to, and then you can open that dialogue.
I'm sure that, when we talk about creating procedures for taking care of complaints and things like that, that these are things that are good from a business standpoint because they make things run more smoothly. But once it becomes a legal issue, how do those systems and procedures that are in place in HR, how do they help, create a situation that's a little bit better for the business owner?
So once it becomes a legal issue, the more concrete and succinct procedures that the business has in place, I think the easier it is to be able to defend against a lawsuit. The easier it is to turn to the employee and say, this is your issue and this is how you should follow your complaint. This is who you should speak to and be open about. But you don't usually learn, as a business won't usually learn that there's a lawsuit in place until after the damage has been done. And in my experience, some of the bigger lawsuits where it costs a lot of money to the business is because either the powers that be in the business or the human resources department has not done enough to communicate with the employee once the issue arose. And then it kind of just snowballed into a bigger issue. And that's when attorneys get involved.
So if I'm hearing you right, and I think I am, that communication really is the core, at the core, whether it's a system that requires you to communicate with certain people, or the owner or managers sit down and communicate and take things seriously, but it really is kind of a base communication issue. Am I hearing you correctly there?
Absolutely, 110%.
Okay.
Some of the more egregious acts is when an employee complains about an issue, even if it's a minor issue. And then they'll go to human resources, or they'll go to a top supervisor, and that human resources department or top supervisor basically rubber stamps the decision of the, let's say, the harasser or the person that they're complaining about. Then the employee feels that they have no other choice but to turn to an attorney.
Right. So when you're talking about HR departments, a lot of our clients and a lot of the listeners to this podcast don't even have an HR department. So what is the best way for a very small business to actually set up something that you would feel would be a way that they could protect themselves and really protect the employee? I mean, it should be a dual protection situation.
Of course,
that they're investing in systems to protect the employees as well as themselves. How does a small business that doesn't work or have an established HR department, how do they deal with that situation?
So the best way to deal with it is if there's a possibility to have an office manager that deals with these issues, and an employee handbook. It doesn't have to be a very detailed and long handbook that could take time and money to create. It could just be a few pages that lays out what the duties and responsibilities are for the employee, what their rights are, and that's just quoting certain statutes of the law, hourly rates, stuff like that. And also if that they have any issues, who they can complain to. If there's a disciplinary procedure, progressive disciplinary procedure, let's say one infraction leads to a warning, and the next one to a written warning, next one to suspension and whatnot. But also what they're allowed and what they're not allowed to do in the workplace. Some people don't know that they can speak on their cell phones or can take breaks here and there. So all of that, if that's in an employee handbook, that will clearly show the employee what they're allowed and what they're not allowed to do, and who they can complain to. And my father owns a small business. He owns a dental lab that they make teeth and deal with dentist offices. They don't have an HR department, but I've helped them create an employee handbook, so it's very clear to all the employees what their rights are.
Okay.
I think that's important. And I know that most employees appreciate knowing that there's a document that represents what the rules are so that they don't get put in a situation where they're being told, hey, you've messed up and you didn't follow the rules. Well, if there's no rules written down, how do I know what the rules are? How do I know what your expectation is of me as your employee? So it's a great thing to have in place.
Absolutely. And I've seen small businesses get in trouble because when there is nothing in writing and it becomes a he said, she said issue and it goes to court, that usually favors the employee when the employer has put nothing in writing. And even though the employer may be completely honest about the situation, and the employee may be telling all lies about what happened, but when there's nothing in writing, it favors the employee.
That's an important point. Alex, I'm curious what kinds of situations that you've seen as an attorney that come up in a typical employer-employee conflict. Is it unpaid wages? What are some of the things that you typically see?
There's a lot of unpaid wages, and that usually affects people who are in this country, immigrants or undocumented immigrants, because I see a lot of big and small businesses exploit workers. But in outside of the wage realm, you have sexual harassment, you have discrimination based on race or religion or gender. You have retaliation, where an employee complains about a discriminatory conduct, whether it's a comment or a sexual act. And then after that, the employer, because of that complaint, the employer then either terminates them or starts treating them worse off to push them out.
So here's something that's actually been a topic. It's been a while in our organization. We had a topic at one point that when does a joke cross the line from being a joke into some kind of discriminatory period? I mean, we have a something here that we don't allow coarse jesting at all.
Right.
But we had a conversation, and it was like, that's a really good question. So when would it go from something that is, say, non non-effective, or you wouldn't affect somebody in a negative way or objectify somebody into something that would. Is there something in the law that defines that, or is it just all about the emotion around whatever is said?
It's an excellent question because there's really nothing in the law that defines that, but where and it goes back to having something in writing that encourages employees that if you feel that you're being treated wrong, if you feel that there's jokes or comments coming your way that are hurting you, then speak up, because unless that employee speaks up, the employer has no knowledge of it and therefore cannot be liable.
Okay, so as soon as the employee speaks up and the owner or manager becomes aware of it, all of a sudden that's when action needs to happen.
Yes, that's when it becomes the employer's duty to protect that employee from that conduct and any other illegal conduct that may stem from that, rather than, oh, this employee is too sensitive or this employee is a crybaby, and if you allow it to continue to happen, now you're running into illegality.
Gotcha. So discounting somebody else's opinion or feelings is really a dangerous place to go.
Yes.
So, okay. That makes sense.
Let's talk for a minute about immigration just as an issue, because I know all over the country we've got listeners that own businesses that require or utilize immigrant workers. And I'm not going to suppose that those may be legal or illegal. I don't know the arrangements, but I know it's common in blue-collar trades to rely on, in order to keep costs low, especially in parts of the South. I don't know what, I suppose that there may be a similar situation, although a different immigrant population perhaps in New York City and in the area there. But this is a thorny issue for sure, and I know that a lot of the work that you've done has crossed over into immigration issues. Talk a little bit about what you've seen, and keeping in mind our audience as blue collar business owners in blue collar trades. What would be some of your recommendations to them and ways to make sure that they're doing things the right way?
Well, when it comes to immigration issues, Homeland Security and the Department of Labor lay out specific regulations as to what the responsibility of the employer is, filling out I-9, documenting things. But like you said, many businesses, just to stay above water, can't afford to do that, just as the same way that many undocumented workers need to make a paycheck to support their families. So as long as the employer is following the law with respect to paying proper wages, minimum wage, and overtime, and not misclassifying these workers, then it should be fine. Once the employer starts paying them less than what they're entitled to or ignoring overtime, then the employer can bring suit, and labor laws are very protective of the employees. What then becomes a problem for the employer is, well, this person's undocumented. Maybe I can complain to the Department of Labor or to immigration authorities and have them deported or have them arrested. Then it becomes a double-edged sword, because that same employee can complain to the immigration that the employer didn't follow the rules as well. So both parties wind up getting hurt.
So what happens I know there's a lot of talk in the arena around salary positions, that when, I know there's this cutoff that you have X amount of dollars and you can work them to the bone, but if it's under that, you can't. So, I mean, that's kind of the perceived.
There was a change, I think, recently about that, and then it got undone or something because of changes in the administration. I don't know. Do you know what we're talking about, Alex? And can you shed some light on that?
I think a lot of it is state specific.
Okay.
And each state, they have their minimum wage employees, but also if you perform certain tasks, your managerial, supervisorial, administrative, you're exempt from overtime, and then you're getting a salary. But that's all state specific.
I see.
Okay.
And in terms of when you hire someone, is there ever a situation where you could set an expectation about how that person's wages will increase on a schedule, and then failure to meet that schedule could create a situation where that employee could bring a lawsuit in order to try to claim certain money?
Sure, that's a good question. If the employer hires an employee, it puts in writing what the wage rate will be and how that will increase going forward based on certain circumstances. And if the employee meets those circumstances but the employer does not honor that wage rate and the increase, then it's a potential breach of contract claim.
Okay.
Otherwise, if there's nothing in writing about the wages, you just have to pay minimum wage and the time and a half for all hours, all overtime hours.
Okay.
Does that include holiday pay too, or is that? I know a lot of places. My son works in the oil fields. He gets double time for holiday.
That's if the employer offers double time. It's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement. Ah, okay. I learned something today. I thought all holiday was double time pay.
No, I mean most companies will offer double time pay for holidays, but it's not a requirement.
Okay. Good to know.
Alex, in your experience, what are some of the biggest pitfalls that you see? And we've talked about communication, obviously, about not having good systems in place and policies and procedures for handling HR complaints and issues. But are there other things that business owners could think about at every level that could help them just do a better job of managing employees and staying out of situations like the ones that you have to deal with?
Other than communication, I think, and we're talking about small businesses, the best way is for the employer to be visible to the employees, for the employer to be present, and just have someone that they know that they can speak to, and they know what's going on from shop to shop, from place to place. Because when they kind of pull away, you can't really control the supervisors and the lower level supervisors and to see what's going on. Another thing I think to watch out for is in many states, employees can record conversations in the workplace and it's not illegal. That you don't need dual consent, such as California is a state where you would need to inform the other side or everybody else that you are recording this conversation. Places like New York, you don't have to. So if something's going on and the employer is not doing anything about it and the employee is recording it, that's damning evidence going forward.
Interesting. And allowable in a court.
Absolutely.
Wow. Learned two things.
Yeah, this has been an interesting conversation. Yeah. I'm sure there's some things we haven't thought of that would be good to cover. What are we missing?
I think what would be best for small business owners is to speak with an attorney. You don't need to spend a lot of money, but speak with an attorney so you know what you're covered on and how you can protect yourself against various claims of discrimination and retaliation. If you have a basic knowledge of the law and you have an employment procedure or a handbook in place, you should be fine as long as you follow that policy.
So the last question that I have is about insurance. Is there insurance out there that can, I would think there would be like an umbrella policy that these guys could take out that could kind of help them with legal fees if, in fact, something ever really happened.
Most businesses do have insurance. Not all insurance covers, and remember, to sue for discrimination or retaliation, you need to prove it's an intentional act. So not all insurance policies cover intentional act in the workplace, but there are. I've handled many cases against employers that have insurance policies in place, and that certainly helps protect and keeps the business going forward, because without insurance, you go underwater.
Yeah. I mean, I would think if I was out there listening and I was in this situation, knowing that, having your systems in place of if somebody has a complaint, have your systems in place for warning system where you have a written system, a verbal system, a written system, and third time, you're done for any infractions that happen, and having somebody on the staff that can be in your stead if you're not around and make really good decisions.
Clear chain of command,
and knowing that you need to take every single complaint seriously, that this is not about he said, she said, that everything needs to be dealt with and deal with it in an open and transparent manner so you never end up in court will be
Absolutely.
The best path. I mean, that's what I would think if it was me.
100% true, because most employees will exaggerate, and you'll have a lot of the boys who cried wolf, but it's the employer's job to handle and listen to every complaint, handle them fairly, and provide a baseboard to anyone that complains. And in this way, you'll avoid getting into trouble.
Alex, this has been a great interview, and I appreciate your time. We always like to make sure that the listeners to the show can get in touch with you if there's any questions that they may have that you could answer. Would you be open to that and maybe share a way that people could connect with you?
Yes, you could reach me at 718-504-6090, or you can always email me. I respond to emails right away. It's my last name, Umansky, UMANSKY, at mosheslaw.com. That's MOSHES law, LAW.com. And I'll be happy to speak with anyone that has any legal questions.
Awesome.
In the employment realm.
Very good. Thanks, Alex. And before we let you go, we always like to end by asking our guests for a quote that has meant something to them, relevant to your life. And maybe you can just tell us one that means something to you, and then tell us what it means to you.
Sure. I have a good one, and it's similar to ones I see on the road, where you drive through a residential block and you see a sign, drive as though your kids live here. Drive carefully. Treat your employees as though they're your children. Hold them accountable when they're doing something wrong, but treat them fairly, treat them right, and have an open means of communication, and you'll have a happy workplace.
Very good. Alex Umansky, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Alex.
Bye-bye.